beneath the ashes. They stumbled upon the fire pit by accident, or perhaps by some unspoken compulsion. The campsite was a hollowed-out clearing in the middle of the forest, far from the road they had taken hours earlier, and by now the sun had vanished completely, leaving only the ragged smear of twilight behind the thick treeline. Branches arched overhead, skeletal fingers against the darkening sky, and the air smelled faintly of wet moss and smoke that had long since dissipated. The pit itself was little more than a circle of blackened stones, rimmed with ash and charred fragments of wood. Something about the way the earth was mounded in its center made Lena pause. She crouched, brushing dirt from the pit's edge with careful fingers. Beneath the ash, there was an outline rectangular, thin, and disturbingly deliberate. She pulled. A journal emerged, its cover coated in grime but intact, the leather cracked along the spine. Oddly, it was warm to the touch, as if it had been waiting just below the surface for them. She set it on her knees, brushing away the final flakes of dirt. The first thing she noticed, the unnerving thing that made her catch her breath, was the handwriting. Her handwriting. The letters were familiar. The precise loops of her A, the abrupt angles of her T, the small flourish at the bottom of her Y. Each entry on the first few pages was neat, dated days before, yet the dates didn't make sense. Some of them were yesterday, some were months ago, and a few bore dates that hadn't yet arrived. Who could have done this? She whispered, though her voice sounded muffled even to her own ears. Her companion, Mark, leaned over her shoulder, frowning in the low light of the lantern. "It's impossible," he said, voice low, cautious. "This looks like your handwriting. How could it?" She didn't answer. She was already flipping pages, eyes scanning the words with a growing sense of dislocation. The entries began innocuously enough. Reminders, notes about the campsite, sketches of trees and rocks. Then the handwriting began to change. The loops became more jagged, letters cramped, sentences fractured. The tone shifted. There were warnings, small at first, almost casual. "Don't light the fire. Don't leave the clearing after dark." She froze. They had just walked into the clearing, candles of the dying sunset brushing their shoulders. Her stomach twisted. Mark is not who he says he is. Trust the shadows, not the people. Mark glanced at her uneasily. "Are you messing with me?" She shook her head, voice caught in the throat. She turned the page. The entries escalated quickly, frantic. Words spilled across the paper in looping spirals, overlapping with one another. Sentences interrupted mid-thought. "The smoke moves against us. The trees are wrong. I hear myself whispering. Don't. I shouldn't have come back. Don't answer if it calls. Don't touch." Each page seemed to throb with urgency, a living echo of a mind trapped in anticipation or terror. Lena's pulse accelerated. The forest around them was impossibly still. The usual night noises, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, had vanished, replaced by a kind of oppressive silence that pressed against their ears. The lantern light flickered, casting shadows that were too long, too angular, and they seemed to lean closer as she read. "The fire pit is a doorway. Do not dig. Do not look. I am watching myself, watching us. The ash remembers. The ash knows." Her hands shook as she continued, unable to stop. A noise, subtle at first, like dirt scraping against stone, made her glance toward the fire pit. The soil had shifted slightly. Nothing visible, yet a sense of being observed crawled along her spine. "Mark will not be what he seems. The hands that pull the journal are my own. The writing is blood, is breath, is time folded back. I cannot escape what I write, but neither can you." Lena's stomach sank. Every word mirrored events that had just occurred or that were occurring now. She remembered the way Mark had leaned over her shoulder, the hesitation in his voice. The journal wasn't just predicting the present. It was dictating it. "Lena," Mark said, voice tighter, almost strangled. "We should leave. Now." She didn't answer. Another page, and the writing had deteriorated further. Lines scraped across the margins, letters bleeding into one another. words looping back in impossible directions. I watched myself dig. I wrote myself here. The shadows are alive, the shadows are mine. Do not trust the lantern. It lies. The fire pit knows us. Do not breathe in the ash. The ash will call your name. A gust of wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sound like faint laughter, or perhaps a voice calling her own name. The lantern sputtered violently. Lena's stomach twisted with a sudden, irrational dread. She turned to Mark. His face was pale, rigid, eyes wide. The shadows in the clearing shifted, subtly at first, then with unnerving intent. The lines of the fire pit seemed to deepen, blacker than the surrounding earth. It was as though the pit itself exhaled a darkness that pressed at the edges of the lantern light. I wrote myself here. I see myself writing myself. Do not open the fire pit. Do not. The final pages were nearly illegible, scrawled in jagged, frantic loops, ink blotting across the paper. The words were repeated, mirrored, sometimes reversed. I am not me. I am them. They are me. I wrote this for me, for us, for you. Do not. Do not. Do not. The wind shifted again, and Lena felt the brush of movement at her ankles, subtle but insistent. She looked down. The ash of the fire pit swirled upward, as if caught in an invisible current. The shadows leaned, stretched, and a faint outline formed in the center of the pit, tall, angular, and strangely human. Mark's hand found hers, trembling, but she didn't move. Her eyes were drawn downward, toward the swirling ash and the pit itself. Then she saw it. A hand, pale, gripping the edge of the pit, fingers curling in a mirror of her own. She gasped. The hand wasn't real, or maybe it was too real. The journal slipped from her lap, falling open to a page that hadn't existed before. The words were fresh, written in her handwriting, but she couldn't recall ever writing them. Do not look up. Do not leave the page. I am under the ashes. I am beneath the fire pit. I will wait until you read this and call me. Lena's vision blurred. The forest tilted, uncertain, and the shadows in the trees lengthened unnaturally. The lantern flared, then dimmed, revealing nothing and everything at once. Mark's voice called her name, distant, warped, and she couldn't tell if it came from him or from the journal itself. The fire pit hissed softly, a sound like breath escaping lungs, and the ash twirled higher. Lena reached for the journal, compelled. Mark's hand tightened on hers, trying to pull her back. The words were alive now, writhing across the page, folding over themselves in impossible geometries. I wrote you here. You wrote me here. There is no after. There is no before. Only the pit. Only the ash. Only the writing. Only me. A sudden silence fell. The trees held their collective breath. The lantern guttered out. Lena's chest tightened. Mark's grip vanished. The journal fell open on the ground, pages fluttering as if a wind passed through it, though there was none. The shadows receded, leaving the clearing unnervingly empty. The fire pit was just stones and ash, no hand, no figure. Yet the journal lay there, open, waiting. Lena's own handwriting, sprawling across the page in a looping sentence that made her stomach turn. You found me. Now you will write yourself. The wind whispered again through the trees, soft and patient, carrying a sound she thought she recognized. Her own voice, calling from somewhere beneath the earth. Lena froze, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the ash shifted subtly beneath her feet. Somewhere in the dark, the forest waited, and the journal waited, and the writing waited, patient, infinite, inevitable. Twilight always here. The sky had never truly darkened, and it had never truly brightened. At first, Caleb thought it was a trick of the weather, a permanent dusk clinging stubbornly to the treetops. But after hours of walking through the dense forest, watching shadows stretch and shrink without reason, he realized the light was wrong. Not just wrong, impossible. It hovered somewhere between day and night, a dull burn that neither illuminated nor concealed, leaving colors muted and edges indefinite. He stopped on a mossy slope, pressing his palms to the damp earth. The ground smelled of rot and pine, sour and alive, and the trees leaned inward as if listening. No wind stirred, but the needles whispered anyway, a sibilant shiver that moved from trunk to trunk. Caleb blinked, and the shapes of the forest seemed to pulse in his vision, breathing along with him. Time too was strange here. His watch had stopped counting hours properly, the hands spinning backward, forward, then pausing, hesitant, as if the device itself could not comprehend the place. He remembered leaving his cabin before sunrise. Or had it been yesterday, or last week? The forest offered no markers, no reference beyond the same endless gray-gold sky pressing down. He wandered. Step after step, he counted the impressions of his boots in the moss, tracing patterns in the fading soil. The tracks multiplied unnaturally. At one point, he turned to find footprints not his own, smaller, then larger, overlapping with his, marching in circles he had never taken. Caleb tried calling out. His voice bounced weakly among the trees, swallowed by the immensity of trunks and shadows. No echo returned. Only the light, stubborn and diffuse, spilling across leaves, never changing, never settling. The forest seemed to notice him. When he crouched to examine a strangely twisted root, the shadows around him shifted, stretching toward him, pulling away, retreating. When he looked up, he glimpsed movement just beyond the periphery, branches brushing against each other, though no wind stirred. And there was always the hum, low and constant, a vibration in the air that seemed tied to his heartbeat. He came to a clearing, or thought he did. The space opened abruptly, circular, almost perfectly round, the trees forming a natural coliseum. At the center, a pool of still water reflected the impossible sky, the unchanging hue that refused to declare day or night. Caleb leaned closer, and the reflection twisted, showing him with a face that was almost, but not quite, his own. Longer, thinner, eyes that blinked slower. He recoiled. The forest around the clearing reacted. The light thickened, pressing at the edges of his vision. Trees bent subtly, almost human-like, as if observing, cataloging him. The hum deepened. Caleb's pulse rattled in his ears. Memory frayed. He tried to remember how he had arrived here, retracing imagined paths, but every recollection dissolved when he reached for it. He could recall a cabin, a pack, a flashlight, but each thought was slippery, as though the forest swallowed the edges, leaving only fragments. He tried moving again, leaving the clearing, but the trees shifted subtly, rearranging themselves. Paths he thought familiar ended abruptly in thickets that had not existed moments ago. Rocks that had marked a slope were gone, replaced with darker soil, hollow impressions, and the sensation of being watched intensified. The sky remained unchanged. Hours passed, or minutes, or nothing measurable at all. Caleb's skin prickled with unease. He began noticing details he could not have noticed before. The bark patterns of trees repeating exactly, like stencils. Leaves forming symbols in the periphery of his vision. Shadows that blinked in tandem with his eyes. He rubbed his temples, trying to ground himself, but the forest pressed closer, patient, aware. He paused beside a stream, kneeling to drink. The water was clear, impossibly so, but his reflection wavered. His mouth opened, and he heard not his own voice but something else. Slow, deliberate, low, repeating his name in a cadence just behind his perception. He jerked back, and the reflection receded, showing him again, then splitting into 2 images, then 3. Caleb felt the first ripple of panic. His memories of his own face, his own hands, began to blur. He could not recall when he had last felt familiar or known. The forest had begun erasing him, or perhaps rewriting him. A fragment of thought intruded. I am not who I was. Or am I? Night, or some approximation of it, never came. The diffuse light remained, draped over the forest like a shroud. Yet, shadows lengthened and thickened, concentrating near the base of trees and rocks, curling around stumps and roots as if observing, waiting. When Caleb stepped forward, the shadows recoiled slightly, then followed, slithering along the ground. He He stumbled into another clearing. This one was different, smaller, more intimate, and at the center a hollowed stump gaped, blackened inside. He approached cautiously. The hum vibrated in his chest. He saw, reflected faintly in the stump's cavity, a memory of himself that should have been impossible. Younger, older, every age compressed into one unstable vision. He blinked, shifted again. The forest began to close in. Trees subtly leaned toward him, roots pressing against unseen soil, leaves brushing with a sound almost like breath. The hum became words, or perhaps it always had been. Stay, follow, but they weren't words. They were impressions, suggestions that burrowed beneath his skin, twisting perception. Caleb turned, trying to find the path he thought he had taken. The forest refused. He walked in a circle, following shapes that seemed familiar, only to return to the same clearing with the stump. Each pass felt longer, slower, his own body moving at a different pace than his mind. He tried to shout, to mark the trees, but the sound swallowed itself, leaving only the hum and the endless, impossible sky. At one point he paused and tried to count, but the numbers slipped from him. 1, 2, 3, then scrambled letters, then unfamiliar symbols that seemed to float in the air when he blinked. He reached to touch a tree, and its bark gave way, soft and warm, pulsing slightly like skin. The light shifted ever so subtly, elongating the trunks, flattening the clearing. Caleb stumbled back, gasping. Memory fragmented further. He tried to remember leaving home, leaving work, leaving the road, but the edges of those recollections were chewed away, leaving only the sensation of the forest pressing, watching, folding itself around him. He remembered a map once, a plan, but when he reached for it, nothing existed in his pocket. His own body felt unfamiliar. Limbs too long, torso too short, heart beating out of sync. The clearing with the stump became a center, always. No matter where he wandered, he returned. The sky never changed. Shadows always watched. Sounds of movement, a snapping branch, a shift in leaves, echoed across the forest even when nothing moved. He began speaking aloud, asking questions, but the only reply was the hum, or his own voice warped, delayed, answering him differently than he expected. He tried lying down, closing his eyes, willing sleep to claim him. The forest did not obey. In dreams, or what he assumed were dreams, he walked, watched by countless iterations of himself, all moving in impossible synchrony, each step mirrored by shadows that weren't his own. He woke, or thought he did, in the same clearing, the stump gaping, the sky the same unyielding gray gold. Hours, days, or some impossible combination passed. Caleb could not measure them. He no longer knew if he had spoken to someone, or if voices were echoes of memory, or if memory itself had become a shape he could step into and observe. The forest pressed at him like a tide, patient, unrelenting, alive. At some point he touched the stump again. The cavity had changed. Inside, the hollow seemed to breathe. The edges wavered, reflecting not him, but a distorted space where he could see trees bending over a sky that was too bright and too dim at once, where shadows moved contrary to physics, where footprints appeared and vanished. He stepped back. The forest whispered, not in words, but in sensation. In the pull of air, the pressure of roots underfoot, the shift of unseen leaves brushing past his face. Caleb blinked, and for a single heartbeat, the stump, the clearing, the forest, the sky, everything paused, suspended, as if considering him. When he opened his eyes again, the forest had rearranged slightly. Or perhaps he had shifted, or perhaps both. The sky remained impossibly fixed between day and night, unchanging and unyielding. Shadows lurked. The hum persisted, and Caleb, unmoored from time, from memory, from certainty, realized only one truth. He could walk endlessly, and the forest would continue to rewrite itself around him, patient, deliberate, infinite. He moved forward, or he thought he did. The light and shadow shifted with him. Shapes whispered at the edge of perception. Names, some familiar, some not, brushed the inside of his skull. He reached a slope and stumbled, eyes catching the horizon that did not exist, the sky that refused release. And then, somewhere beyond thought, the forest absorbed him. Not violently, not aggressively, but quietly, subtly, like water seeping into stone. He existed in the forest, and the forest existed in him. His own reflection in the stump's hollow flickered, showing him, not showing him, fracturing into versions that were not him, not fully. The sky remained, and it would remain,